Federalism. That's the start of chapter 2. What is it? Maybe you're tapping into high school where there was some discussion in government class what federalism is, or poli-sci class. So what is it? It's the United States system of government. That doesn't mean just federal government, even though it says federal in the name. It actually what divides the government between us having a federal government and the individual states each having their own government. Why do we have this? It prevents a concentrated source of government power in one individual or small groups of individuals. So rather than having one federal system, there's 50 plus DCs systems, and then the states allow cities and towns and villages to have their own system. So the questions that we are going to look at this week are going to the following. We're going to talk about how federal criminal laws are established, how the state criminal laws are established, and how they can coexist. We're also going to talk about the branches of government regarding criminal law, their roles regarding criminal law, and that's going to be, these 4 questions are going to be this video lecture, and how the federal and state judicial systems work in the United States will be the next video lecture for the week. So let's talk about federal government and how they prosecute crimes. So how are federal criminal laws established? Well, first of all, they are created, as I said, by legislators, our criminal laws. In this case, for the federal system, it would be Congress. Congress has the power to make laws, but it's the Constitution that gives Congress that authority. If it is not in the Constitution, then Congress can't make a law regarding it. There has to be a specific authority inside the Constitution that allows them to make particular laws. And the federal government regulates the country. So if somebody is prosecuted on a federal crime, charged with a federal crime here in New York, if somebody out in Arizona breaks the same law, it would be the same law. We'll talk about the state system in a second. But there is a lot of prosecution in New York, especially northern New York, relative to border crossing. There's a lot of trafficking coming in through Canada of drugs and immigrants. And the same thing happens down on the borders of Mexico and Arizona. So the laws that the feds prosecute here in New York are the same as the laws that are being prosecuted down in Arizona. Specifically, let's talk about the types of crimes that they specifically prosecute. The specific crimes specified in the Constitution, if you were to pull up the Constitution, you would see Amendment 3 is treason, high seas, counterfeiting. You're going to see these words right in the Constitution, that these are felonies, these are crimes, these are punishable. Piracy, the copyright laws, piracy. High seas, like I said, counterfeiting. The law enforcement agency that oversees counterfeiting is the Secret Service. You guys might think that, oh, they protect the president. Yep, that's what they do now. That was not their job when they started. The job when they created the Secret Service, was to deter counterfeiting and prosecute, or to arrest folks for counterfeiting. And then I think after the second president, Garfield, was assassinated, the job of protecting the president became their job, along with prosecuting or investigating counterfeiting. And then there's treason. But Congress, through the authority of precedent made by the United States Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court allowed Congress to create laws involving transactions crossing state borders, or intercommunications and interdealings through the states under the Commerce Clause. We have the Commerce Clause regarding trade, and the Supreme Court said that based on that amendment or that constitutional power, Congress is allowed to make criminal laws regarding things that happen crossing state borders, which brings us to the types of crimes involving the internet. The internet is worldwide. It crosses borders. There's no boundaries. So things like child pornography or identity theft, computer terrorism, anything that involves security involving the internet, any banking, securities, that sort of thing, all falls under the Commerce Clause, and they can make laws to prevent those things from happening. Other things the feds prosecute: crimes that are committed on federal property. So if a crime happened at the post office, it would be prosecuted by the feds. So military bases is another one. Anything that involves a federal employee, anything that involves money, currency or coins, treason, like I said, national security, foreign affairs, and commerce that crosses state lines. And that doesn't just mean the internet, could mean television, could be the wiring, any sort of wire service, transportation. An example of somebody prosecuted under federal laws, Edward Snowden. I don't know if that rings a bell to anyone. They made a movie about him. He was the government employee who leaked to The Guardian the idea that the government was spying and using technology to watch people in after 9/11 and the establishment of the Homeland Security. Julian Assange, co-founder, owner of WikiLeaks, there's charges against both of these guys, and they're both hiding in other countries. Edward Snowden, they want to charge him with treason. Julian Assange with the same, and all he did was publish information that was given to him, secret governmental information that was given him by a government employee, and the government employee found themselves charged and had spent at least 8 years, I think, in prison. So anyway, these are the types of things that the federal government will charge and prosecute. And state criminal laws, how are they established? They're established according to their own constitution of their states and their primary regulatory authorities. And they allow the local charters in, cities and within their borders. So the state of New York is the laws created in the state of New York are the trump all New York criminal laws. If a local law is made, let's say by the city, if it conflicts with the state law, then it's going to be unenforceable. And the same thing works at the next hierarchy. When the state law conflicts with the federal law, it is the federal law that is the supreme. We're going to talk about a little bit more about that in a second. But let's finish through who's the authority, where does that come from? Like I said, the state's constitution. And like I said, the federal law is the same, state to state. Federal crimes committed in New York are the same as federal crimes if they were committed in Arizona. But that is not the same state to state. The state has their own sets of criminal laws. Now, obviously, a crime that's a homicide is probably a crime everywhere in every state. They may grade it differently. They may treat it differently. And we'll talk about that when we talk specifically about specific types of crimes. But like I said, Colorado, Vermont, New York, it's legal to have small amounts of marijuana, possess small amounts of marijuana. In other states, that's not true. In Nevada, prostitution is legal, but it's not legal in New York. So, again, each state can make their own criminal laws. So I asked on the local ordinances, since I have it up here on the screen, local ordinances created by their governed bodies, the villages and the local towns each make their ordinances. The cities make their ordinances passed by like a common council or a board, established board, and they have the authority to create those. Now I'm going to do an example a little later of how that works. So, can the federal law differ from state to state? No, we've already talked about that. Does the state law differ from state to state? The answer is yes. We've just discussed that with examples. But is it possible for the federal law and the state law to conflict? Do they conflict? Sure. And the prime example actually of the federal law and the state law where it conflicts is this possession of marijuana. Under the federal law, you can't possess marijuana. But under state law, in some states, as we talked about, you can. And, in Colorado, they have a more broader idea of the law. In New York, it's very limited. But the question is, can the feds go in and prosecute? They sure can, but it's up to them to decide. Nothing has ever happened with this, and you might want to look into it a little further. I might actually make it an assignment an option assignment to look into, is how they could affect each other, the federal law and the possession of marijuana laws in Colorado. But as of right now, there is a federal law in the books that makes it illegal to possess marijuana and to sell marijuana, to grow marijuana. But in Colorado, those laws are very broad and liberal, and they do conflict. So, but from what I understand, the federal law is the feds out in Colorado aren't particularly enforcing it, but they could. Can states create laws enforcing or extending federal laws? So, for instance, saying that we like this federal law, we're on board, and we want to make sure it gets enforced. And you know what? We want to add to it. Well, it sounds like that would be a good idea, but it's not. And the governor of Arizona tried this a few years back. They passed a law tightening up or adding laws to having illegal immigrants in Arizona. And basically that it was dubbed the Support Our Law Enforcement and Safe Neighbors Act. And the act made it a state misdemeanor. It's a crime for a state for an illegal immigrant to be in Arizona without carrying registration documents required by federal law. It authorized the state and local law enforcement to penalize those people to be knowingly sheltering, hiring, and transporting illegal immigrants, and that they could start their own immigration deportation proceedings in the state system. And that was challenged, and it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, that's a federal law, and that's the feds' jobs. It's not your job to charge people who might be knowingly sheltering, hiring, and transporting illegal immigrants, and it's not your job to start deportation proceedings. That's the federal's job. And I think Arizona was just kind of up in arms because not a lot of stuff was happening. So, no, states cannot create laws enforcing already existing federal laws or extending those federal laws. Let's do a couple examples here. Congress passes a law criminalizing the posting of child pornography on the internet. Question is, do they have the authority to create this law? Yes, they do. We've just talked about it. Constitution, through the Commerce Clause, gives them the power to regulate laws involving the internet. But my next question is, if the state has a criminal law criminalizing the same conduct, can both the state and the federal government prosecute a defendant for one act of downloading child pornography? Does this state law, conflict with the federal law? No. Is it a law that tries to enforce federal law, like the Arizona law we just talked about? Does it extend it? No, it's actually the same exact law, except it's in the state. Can that happen? Can they coexist? Yes, they can. The answer to this question is yes. The defendant can be prosecuted in both the state and the federal government for one act of downloading child pornography. They're different sovereigns. They're two different criminal statutes. They don't conflict with each other. The theory is the federal government passing criminal laws is to protect our federal society, and New York State is protecting society in the state of New York. You might think, well, isn't, you get one punishment for one, not the other. Is this double jeopardy? Nope, it's not. This is okay to do, and this actually happens all the time. Where the state, sometimes this will start with a state arrest, sometimes it starts with a state arrest, and it gets looked into, and state prosecutors will contact the feds and say, hey, we got this kind of case. Is this something you guys are interested in too? Like, they communicate, the prosecutors on both sides of the coins, the state prosecutors and the federal prosecutors. So yes, this is okay. Roles of the government branches. Another little recap possibly from high school. We have our executive branch. It's headed by the president, the governor, the mayor, depending on which government entity you're in. The key here is also found in the what's also found in the executive branch is law enforcement. They fall under executive branch, and prosecutors. They fall under executive branch. Our legislative folks, we know who they are, the lawmakers, Congress, Senates, the New York State senators, and they have their House, and our city common council makes our laws, and then we have our judicial branch, which is the court system, doing the checks and balances on legislative and executive. Executive, the law enforcement, the prosecutors, think criminal procedure. Are they doing what they're supposed to be doing with this particular criminal case? And then we have our legislators. The courts are going to look at, one, are they making laws that don't conflict with other bodies of law, i.e. states, feds, and the city and the states? And are they making laws that make sense? Are they vague? Are they overbroad? Remember our example from last week with the illegal, do not distribute. It's illegal to distribute violent video games to minors. Those are the things the judicial branch is looking for. And I'm going to leave you with one more example. We have a mayor who enacts a policy that prohibits police officers in the city from enforcing a state law prohibiting the possession and use of marijuana. The mayor's policy specifically states that within the city limits, marijuana is legal to possess and use. Is that a proper act on the mayor's part to actually institute a policy that completely conflicts with a state law? No, that is improper. We covered that. So that's improper, and the mayor would be certainly in violation, or that law would be in violation of the Constitution, and a judge or a judicial branch that was, whatever court in the judicial branch where that is taking place, will claim that it is unconstitutional under that state's law. So now we are going to switch gears and review the American legal system. We're going to cover the federal court system, and we are going to cover the state court system. We'll show you New York's, how the New York court system will work, because it's very important. It's actually very complicated too. It's not straightforward. And we'll take a look at those.